Chapter 12. Love your community. The greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members. Coretta Scott King. I remember we colored folks had our own preachers, but we couldn't have church unless we had a white preacher sitting there watching and listening. He was to keep an eye on us and tell us what they wanted us to know out of the Bible. What they wanted our preachers to say is, it was God's will for colored folks to be slaves and them to be our owners. We all knew better than that. They allowed the colored preacher to teach us about the part when God freed slaves from Egypt and how Moses took his people to the land of milk and honey. I love that story. And I love to hear about Jesus. What we held on to is how Jesus loves everybody, and he came to save his people, and that included us. I learned the stories about Jesus and the stories he told. Mama taught me always to hold steady onto Jesus, and he would see me through this tough life. I learned I can talk to God anytime, and I don't have to talk out loud. I always talked to God every day, just like I'm talking to you right now. I talked to him, and I would ask him to save me from slavery. You know, he talked back to me too. I learned a lot from watching and listening to other people. Mama and Daddy taught me about what I needed to know to survive slavery. But I didn't just have my own family to learn from. All the colored folks around where I lived were like family. We had to be. You never know when your own sister, brother, father, and mother would be sold away, and you could be left with no family. So you call all the women around sister, and the men were your brother. Mama was mama or auntie to all the children around. We took care of each other as best we could. Although we attended the white church, we looked forward to our own services. On certain nights, we steal away to Jesus. In other words, we tiptoed out to the camp meeting, an invisible church under the stars and the bright moon. Usually, it was near a creek where folks could fish. We had plenty of food out there in the wood. Folks brought sweet potatoes and corn to roast in the big fire. Sometimes there was roasted duck and fried rabbit and steamed clams, crabs, and oysters fresh from the Chesapeake Bay. The fiddlers, old and young, would grab a corner and go to fiddling. There was always some banjo players strumming. Flames from the fire would be jumping to the beat up 10 feet high. Field hands and house workers blended their voices like a choir of songbirds. Someone would call out a part of a song, and we'd sing it back to him. It was truly soul singing, because we meant those words that we sang to God. We really wanted him to hear us. Before the preaching, the men set up a wagon by the fire for the preachers to stand on so everybody could see. Then the preaching and the teaching would start. We would hear how the preacher said, "A word from the Lord." Now, that's when those stories we learned in church with the white man there changed a little. I found out all about Moses and the Israelites leaving Egypt was the same as God freeing my people and taking us out of slavery. We learned how Jesus was born to save all of us, and that included us colored folks. After the Bible lesson, it was time for some stories and the news that folks picked up from white men talking to each other. When I was little, my grandmother Modesty was one of the old folks from Africa who told us stories about being free. We heard all about the stories of freedom back in Africa and how colored people owned property and were kings and queens. Her stories made me know I had a right to my freedom. I heard about freedom in the country called Up North. Those stories also taught us how people used the North Star to guide them all the way to freedom. I found out there were people that would help you run away from slavery if you found the tracks on the Underground Railroad. They said that the Underground Railroad tracks started in the South and take people to freedom up north. But you have to find the right people in the train station. My eyes got big listening to these stories. I would ask my daddy where I could find those tracks. Daddy said, "Minty, I can't tell you. I'm afraid you would run off and try to find them." Well, he was right about that. I was all ears listening to those stories to see if I could figure out where to find those Underground Railroad tracks. I asked everybody who told the stories, and I got all kinds of answers because people really didn't know what the Underground Railroad was or if it was real. Every time you heard these stories, they got more far-fetched. Those were times I remember when we could get a good laugh. These times kept me going. It was our love for each other and the bonds that I developed that let me know when I got my freedom, I had to go back for my family. All of these people were my family.